In this video, I intend on covering the story and world of Breath of the Wild, pointing out flaws, but also giving my opinion on how certain things could have worked and been improved. This is something I have not seen too many people cover in depth, and I will also be going over mechanics and gameplay, as well as directly comparing other Zelda games to Breath of the Wild in these two videos. Now, before I get started, I will not be covering the DLCs, but will be mentioning them where relevant. I will, however, be covering the DLCs in another video completely separately from these three. So without further ado, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Now, before I start tearing this game apart, I want to say this. This was Nintendo's first attempt at an open world Zelda game. Is it perfect? Of course not. There are many things I think Breath of the Wild does exceptionally well, like the exploration. I have not seen or heard a game that does exploration better than Breath of the Wild. This game gives you so many ways to traverse this world. For example, running, jumping, swimming. That's pretty standard for most open world games, but it has so many more. Horse riding, stasis boulder jumping, sand seal riding, shield surfing, climbing, and of course paragliding. And that's not even all of them. I do, however, think there was one massive missed opportunity, but I'll get back to that later.
But nay.
For anyone that needs a quick recap of the story, here goes. 10,000 years prior to the events of Breath of the Wild, an event called the Great Calamity was prophesied to happen. The Kingdom of Hyrule, being in the midst of a technological age, thanks to the Sheikah, decide to use this technology against Ganon. So the Sheikah go about building the Guardians, Divine Beasts, and all the Sheikah technology that we see in Breath of the Wild. So the Great Calamity happens as prophesied, but because the Link and Zelda of that time were backed by an entire army of Guardians and Divine Beasts, it was a complete massacre in the favour of Hyrule. Calamity Ganon wouldn't have stood a chance, so yeah, I'm glad we don't get to play through that story, because all we would do is whack Ganon once with the Master Sword and it would be over. Fast forward to the next Great Calamity 10,000 years later, the new King of Hyrule found the prophecy and decided to use the same plan as the last Great Calamity, but this time, Ganon used his level 99 hacking skills to take control of all the Guardians and Divine Beasts, turning them against Hyrule. Link and Zelda, being out of town at the time all this happens, miss out on being destroyed along with the rest of central Hyrule. They try to reach Hyrule Castle to stop Ganon, but they decide to turn around and head towards Kakariko Village. On their way, they run into a ton of Guardians. Luckily, Zelda's sacred powers activate and she's able to cleanse the corrupted Guardians. Link, on the other hand, is down for the count after fighting through a bunch of them, so Zelda tells two Sheikah to send Link to the Shrine of Resurrection. Zelda then goes to try and seal Calamity Ganon away herself. Link wakes up 100 years later with amnesia and finds Hyrule and everyone who lived in it had been completely destroyed by the Guardians, so the monsters of the land, with no one to stop them, turn Hyrule into a wasteland. But that's not completely true, is it? Link wakes up from his slumber to find a very lush, quite lively and decently populated Hyrule. Considering that this game is set in an apocalypse, this just doesn't make any damn sense. And that's what I was trying to convey in the intro for this video with all the Guardians. I mean, this game shows us multiple times how powerful these Guardians are in cutscenes and gameplay. I mean, these things do a ton of damage, 58 damage to be exact, which is more than enough to kill your regular Hylian. And for an even better example, in Zora's Domain there's a tablet depicting a story of how just one rogue guardian before the Great Calamity went up Zora's Domain, lasering everyone it came across, and no one could stop it. They threw spears and everything they could at it, but it did little to no damage until King of Zora's came and picked it up and hurled it off a cliff. Now that was just one guardian. During the Great Calamity there would have been thousands of the things, so why do we see horse settlements even able to exist without being completely destroyed? Because they have no defenses whatsoever. And what makes it even worse is some are just over the hill from where Guardians roam, and that completely contradicts everything that we know and see about them, and I just have to say it's sloppy storytelling. And I'm not just being nitpicky either. Guardians are arguably the most important part of Breath of the Wild. If not for Guardians, Breath of the Wild would not even exist, and there's always been a great importance put on these guys. They were the first thing we saw in the first trailer for the game when it was shown back in 2014, so you can't have something so powerful and integral and expect me to believe it did so little in the 100 years Link had been sleeping. Then there's the Ruined Guardians. If you've ever hit a Guardian with a regular weapon, you know it's not nearly as effective as using Sheikah technology against them, such as ancient arrows, small Guardian weapons, and even deflecting lasers right back at them is super effective. But other than these few methods and the Master Sword, but for a different reason, not because it's super effective against Sheikah technology, but because it's reacting to the calamity housed inside the Guardian, making the Master Sword stronger, Even getting a Guardian struck by lightning does a whopping 1 damage, making them almost completely indestructible. So why do we see so many destroyed? Now obviously the ones stopped by Zelda don't count, but every other one, I don't know. Now I know time destroys all things and 100 years is a very long time, but because of how durable they are, I think that counters that. And it's not like they ran out of power either. You see the blue flame in Hateno Village? It's said that it's supposedly been burning for 10,000 years. And it's still going, and when you bring the flame to either of the labs, it's absolutely being used as a power source, so it's not hard to connect the dots and assume the blue flame is also being used to power the Guardians or something similar. Now there are some people in Hyrule capable of defeating Guardians, but these are extremely few, with these people being Link, Zelda, King Zora, Robbie and maybe Pura, and of course Flower Lady. Even though I still don't think it would have made much of a difference for the survival of Hyrule, and that doesn't explain how some of them would have been destroyed, like this one. And don't say it's the environment or weather, because it's not. As you can see here, they can survive lava. Freaking lava. And the dev team could have easily made it so the legs explode off when they touch lava, but they didn't, so that makes me think it's an intentional detail. So hot or cold weather would do nothing, but none of that matters anyway because of these guys. If there was any doubt that the Stalker variant were incapable of completely destroying Hyrule in 100 years, then don't worry because the Skywatchers would be more than able to achieve this with their air superiority. They're much faster and able to skip any ground obstacles the Stalker variant would have to deal with, such as a pesky Fish King. It would be no match for the Skywatchers since there's no fear of being thrown off a cliff. The Skywatchers would be easily able to single-handedly destroy Hyrule, and they would not just patrol the same area for 100 years. These Guardians would be a very prominent threat, and I think it's no coincidence that, correct me if I'm wrong, you never see a destroyed Skywatcher anywhere in Hyrule because of how powerful they are. Now, I'd like you to imagine what Breath of the Wild would be like if the Guardian's power was consistent with the story, and they had wiped everyone out. I think most of Hyrule would look like what Castletown looks like. I love the atmosphere here, it feels right compared to the rest of Breath of the Wild. And what would the context of the story be like? For one, the story would be much darker, which is a good thing, because there's not too much reminding the player that this game is in fact set in an apocalypse. Nintendo wants Breath of the Wild 2 to be the darker game, but Breath of the Wild 1 had all the tools necessary to pull that off. For example, when you go to one of the main towns linked to a divine beast, partway through the quest to board the divine beast, a memory triggers showing time Link spent with the respective divine beast champion. Now, if all the memories took place in towns like Rivoli's does, then you'd get to see the towns how they were before the Great Calamity and compare them to how they are now after being destroyed. That'd be really effective for atmosphere and a great reminder that Calamity Ganon is a bad thing. While playing Breath of the Wild, stopping Calamity Ganon wasn't always on my mind because the world had not been majorly impacted like it should from his presence, and he doesn't do a whole lot other than just sit in Hyrule Castle. But after seeing the towns destroyed might make you think this naughty pig has to go. Now, you might be wondering if I mean absolutely everyone in this world is dead, and I don't. I just mean mostly everyone. I also have an explanation of how and why this would work, and that's Hateno Village. It would work perfectly. It said it was so far from the Great Calamity that it was unaffected, meaning any Guardian/Sheikah technology would not be corrupted, and I'm imagining it would look something like this, going all around Hateno Village. There's also a Sheikah scientist on site, so this makes sense that they would be able to maintain these defenses for 100 years. I also think it'd be cool as well because it'd be nice to see some regular people using this technology for day-to-day purposes like farmers. It would also make sense that the King of Hyrule would have this technology in another Hylian settlement other than just Central Hyrule. I think this would be safe from any corruption because you don't see what I'm going to call Ganon goop near Hateno. It would also serve as a safe haven for all Hyrulean races to flee to after the Great Calamity, because it's the only one of the towns that would be able to defend itself against the Guardians, because of the Sheikah technology is super effective against Sheikah technology, meaning it would be able to stop any Guardian attacks and or regular monsters. Having only one main town comes with advantages as well. all NPCs in one location streamlines getting quests from NPCs around the world, which would be nice to save time instead of having to run all over Hyrule to find a bunch of mediocre quests. And you could have more quests around improving Hayteno Village as a place to live, giving you more impact on the world, as well as having quests dedicated to the 4 main races of Hyrule, directing you towards each respective town ruins and grabbing a unique item that you could bring back to Hayteno Village. For example, you could find books that's in the Gerudo language, so you have to take it back to Hayteno Village to give to a Gerudo person. They will translate it for you and teach you different sword/weapon techniques like Twilight Princess. Each time you finish a quest for a Gerudo person, they could read you an extra chapter of that book and teach you new techniques depending on what books you bring back for them. You could have multiple spread across the desert, incentivizing the player to explore most of the area. And for the Gorons, while you're on Death Mountain, maybe you could find pieces of a forge or unique ore veins like Master Ore, which glow with a bright red, found only on Death Mountain. And each time you bring back a piece, they permanently upgrade the durability of all weapons, as well as giving them perks like extra damage on all weapons you pick up from that point. For the Rito, they could teach you techniques to make your stamina more efficient during certain activities, etc, etc. For the other ones, you get the idea. I just need quests that reward you with things for doing things you actually want instead of just food items and rupees. While talking about quests, the shrine quests, I want to clarify, are quite good for the most part. They have you solving puzzles outside of shrines themselves, doing unique things that are fun, like Eventide Island and carrying the ice cube through the desert. But there's another benefit of having just one town, and that's getting the armor, because if it's all in one location, it's much harder to miss buying the armor that you need to survive in extreme temperature climates. Now, the fact that this terminal montage, how to get to Goron City video even exists, means I wasn't the only person that missed the elixir sold at the horse stables at the foot of Death Mountain. Now, I know it's not armor per se, but you need the elixir to get to the armor. Now, maybe I'm just stupid, but I also missed the cold resistant armor in the Rito village. I know there's a sign for the armor and everything, but all the buildings there look the same, so I just never found it. I did know of the one in Hayteno village, but you can only get one piece there, so to have complete cold resistance to properly allow you to explore the many cold areas in Breath of the Wild, you'll have to head for either the Rito village located on the other side of the map, or to the Gerudo and get the frost resistant headpiece, which requires you to visit 2 different towns just to get the cold resistance, unless you head straight for the Rito village when you leave the Great Plateau. I think all the armors you can buy being in one spot is really intuitive, since Hayteno village is definitely one of the first places you want to go at the start of Breath of the Wild anyway, so it just gives more incentive to do that. One of the major problems is if the player doesn't head there, they're going to miss out on some really important gear, to the point where they might not be able to progress the game at all. But that's a problem Breath of the Wild already has, so I do think the pros outweigh the cons. Now, while I'm on the subject of important piece of gear you can miss out on, this guy right here gives you item pouches after you get his maracas back. You can then trade in Korok seeds. The problem is this is the only way to get inventory space, and this guy is incredibly easy to miss. Now, the game does tell you to head for Kakariko village, but with a world this large, that can be a difficult task, especially when you have people like me that were waiting ages for this game to come out and had decided before even getting my hands on the game where I already wanted to go. Now, I'm going to take a minute to explain the route I went on for my first playthrough, because I will be referencing it many times, not only during this video, but these other 2. That's one thing I do think is super valuable about Breath of the Wild, is everybody had their own story of where they went, what they discovered, and in the order they did those things, so I'll be quick. In my first playthrough, when I finished the Great Plateau, I was going to head straight for Death Mountain, but the king said it would be foolhardy to head straight for Hyrule Castle as you currently are, so don't do it. But not liking being told what to do, headed straight for Hyrule Castle, not because I thought I could beat the game, because I was curious to see how far I could get before the game said, alright, enough mucking around, now go play the game the way you're actually meant to. I managed to sneak my way up to Windblight, with many deaths on the way up of course, and after throwing myself at Windblight for about half an hour, I decided I would actually go play the game, and headed for Death Mountain, like I originally planned. Like I mentioned before, I did not find the fireproof elixir on my way up, and so I gave up trying for Death Mountain, but instead wanted to see how early I could beat the game. So I did a bunch of shrines and occasionally went back to Hyrule Castle to see if I was strong enough yet, and avoided all the towns like the plague since I wanted to experience the story separately. I eventually found 2 fairy fountains and upgraded the sets of armor I found in the shrines, and gathered about 12 heart containers and beat Wind Blight, Water Blight, Fire Blight and Thunder Blight Ganon. I did die to Thunder Blight Ganon quite a few times, but I eventually made it through to Calamity Ganon himself, beating first try because I had more than enough healing to tank any mistakes I made. He was nearly killing me with every blow, and I also ran out of weapons thanks to the small inventory space I had available to me. Luckily there is weapons in the arena and I managed to finally beat him. Being very nervous that the fight was not over and I'd have to start all over again if I died, I was very happy to see the last part of the fight is a complete joke, but overall was very satisfied with the challenge I had just overcome and beat Breath of the Wild without any pouch upgrades. After I beat the game, I went and did story stuff and pretty quickly came across the Korok Seed guy and found out that you can in fact upgrade the storage space for your weapons. After finding that out, I felt so disheartened and cheated once I found that out. Now I do know once you get his maracas back, he can be found near horse stables where he will give you more slots and say he's heading for the Korok Forest, but that's not the point. Having a character that has something so important but can only be found in one location in a world this large has got to be one of the worst game design choices I've ever seen. It's just bad game design whatever way you look at it, and I do understand I'm an outlier when it comes to finding this guy late game, but I very seriously doubt that I'm the only person that missed him for an extended amount of time. I mean, head in any other direction, then go to Kakariko Village without going through Dueling Pigs, and you're very likely going to miss him. And if you want to beeline Kakariko Village, you can just climb over this mountain, then there's absolutely no reason to ever head down this road, and I offer a solution to this problem as well, and it starts with these chests. Yeah, remember them? Instead of getting random garbage like weapons you can't take because your inventory spaces are full, gems, rupees and arrows, instead you should get item pouch upgrades. When you collect one, you get to select which weapon space you'd like to upgrade, like normal, and with this system it fixes a lot of major issues this game has, like now you can go in any direction when you leave the Great Plateau, blaze your own trail and not have to worry about missing out on weapon slots. And another advantage with it being like this is you'd most likely find this out on the Great Plateau since there's quite a few of these chests on there. 4, correct me if I'm wrong, which is very nice. Imagine that, being able to leave the Great Plateau with 4 bonus inventory slots already. That would be fantastic, and all you'd have to do to get more is clear more monster camps with these chests, and that brings me to my next point, the monster camps. Other than on the Great Plateau where you have few resources in your inventory and raiding monster camps is an easy way to get food and weapons. After that, did you ever go out of your way to clear more? Most likely not, because it's not worth your time when you spend food items on healing. If you get hit, weapons will break and may not be refunded with any good ones, as well as your precious time. It's not worth it because you'll probably just get 1 opal for your troubles, when you can just go smack an ore vein and get the same thing with 1/5 of the time spent doing so. It's pointless. But with my system, of course people will be going out of their way to clear these because now there's reward for doing so, which is a very good thing because the combat in Breath of the Wild is very fun, smacking bokoblins, lesserfoes and moblins around. It's very satisfying. It's fun to throw bombs and weapons around, flurry rush at the right time and parrying incoming attacks. This is all fun to do, and with a reward for doing so, more people would do these things, and it's a shame that there is no reward because a lot of monster camps are really well designed with explosive barrels and boulders and metal crates in certain positions to give the player the upper hand in these fights. And that's the reason I hate Urbosa's Fury, since it breaks this relationship, but I'll explain that in depth in my next video. And yes, I do understand that kind of removes the Koroks from the game, but their sacrifice would be a worthy one. They would still be found in the Korok Forest, but other than that, they would be gone. Not a bad thing though, because that would have freed up some development time to put some of the things, like I mentioned before, into the game with a one main town and getting proper rewards for doing so, instead of little pieces of shit, which there's 900 of these guys, by the way. And I know all the little puzzles everywhere being gone would make Breath of the Wild feel even more empty than it already does, and that is a bad thing, but I think the combat is more important. Plus, the shrines handle the puzzles, and let's be honest, the Korok puzzles get old really quickly. There's only so many times I can shoot all the balloons, lift the metal box into the slot, lift the rock, put it into the pattern, or fly to the spot on time, which can sometimes send you down the mountain that you just climbed. Yeah, fun, but more importantly, it would massively cut down on the completion time of this game, which there's plenty of pointless glut in this game, like the quests, the boss medals, and the Korok seeds. Less is more.
So I really am just a failure.
So games with the story have to overcome the problem of motivation. How do you motivate the player and the character that you play as in an organic way? There are multiple ways of doing this. For some common ones, saving the world is an easy one because saving a lot of people, including yourself, is a pretty relatable thing to want to do. Another common one is the damsel in distress. Mario loves to do this one, and for good reason. It's super easy to set up. Bad guy has your girl, go get bad guy. It doesn't take a ton of time setting up some deep lore, and Mario can start wahooing and yahooing his way into the game almost immediately, and the player doesn't have to wait for the game to set up story before getting to the fun parts. Now, the Legend of Zelda series works on the same concept, but because of the nature of Zelda games being adventure games with dialogue and interacting with NPCs, it lends itself into developing the story more because it's more than just platforms you have to jump over and pits you have to cross. It's a world just begging to be expanded upon. And other Zelda games have shied away from the damsel in distress. For example, Majora's Mask involves no Zelda at all save for one cutscene and focuses more on making the world feel more alive and involved with its in-depth characters and world. As well as Twilight Princess feels more about Link's and Midna's relationship and Midna's character development as a main focus of the story rather than being about Zelda, but Breath of the Wild goes back to the damsel in distress as the main focus of the story. And this can be dangerous because if the character you're supposed to be saving is unappealing, then all motivation is lost. And I'm not a very big fan of this iteration of Zelda. Never have been. You first hear as a disembodied voice, then the king tells you to go save his daughter. Once you get the camera activated on your Sheikah slate, Impa instructs you to go visit these locations and unlock the cutscenes. Once you reach these locations, the cutscenes show you Link and Zelda's relationship, and most of it is Zelda treating Link like shit. Urbosa says many times it's because Link reminds her that her powers have not activated, and because of that, she feels like a failure. And I do understand the weight on Zelda's shoulders would be massive, with her father pressuring her and the fact that she has a vital role to play in something so important, but despite her many attempts, her powers will not activate. But it's still much bigger than just her. Link's role is arguably more important than hers because he has to beat Ganon in a fight, weakening him to a point where Ganon can be sealed away by Zelda. And just another thing real quick, since when has it been Zelda's role to seal away the evil? Usually it's just Link and the Master Sword, where Zelda is more for support, say for Ocarina of Time. Now I'm not saying they can't change things like this, but when more importance is placed on a character that isn't well written, I don't think it's a very good idea. And speaking of things being written, I want to talk about Zelda's diary. Now this unpacks a lot of important information about Zelda, but I'd still like to compare this Zelda to Skyward Sword Zelda. In Skyward Sword, where she's most likely about to say the exact same thing as her Breath of the Wild counterpart, but in Skyward Sword, it feels earned. You feel the history between these two characters, you see how they interact, and after Link wins the wing ceremony, which Zelda pushed Link to do, then we get to this cutscene, and it feels natural. Link's response to Zelda getting taken away from him, rushing headfirst into danger from that point on just to get his Zelda back, feels so much more real compared to Breath of the Wild, where Zelda gets saved by Link in the Gerudo Desert and falls for him, which is pretty cliche, but vital information about Link and Zelda's relationship after that point is only revealed in Zelda's diary. Things like Zelda apologizing to Link for her snooty behavior towards him is hidden in this very missable book. If someone were to miss this book and only saw Zelda in the cutscenes, it could be very bad. And I do think it was a pretty stupid decision to not put these interactions into the cutscenes, so I decided to make how I think these interactions should have gone down. Now, I do make my own storyline, but I'll explain it afterwards, so please, take a look. Father, you summoned me? Zelda, I have just received word from the Gerudo tribe. They have uncovered an artifact in the Gerudo Desert, and inscriptions surrounding the device say it needs your Sheikah slate in order to be activated and to understand the very nature of this device. Some of the inscriptions say it could also be key in delaying the resurrection of Calamity Ganon, buying us more time, so it is crucial that you head off immediately. You will be escorted by Hyrulean guards, and I want you, Link, at her side at all times. But no, Zelda. I know you don't like Link's company, but he must be with you. The Yiga clan has most likely caught wind of this device as well, and with their knowledge of Sheikah technology they may be able to reverse the effects of this device, so it is of the utmost importance it does not fall into their hands, and it will give you more time to get your secret powers activated. Is this understood?
Yes, Father.
Good. It is currently under the watchful eye of the Guru. Now go!
I already have the Hyrulean guards protecting me, so I don't need you. I know what my father said, but I'm ordering you to go.
You have returned. I have heard news that you failed to bring back the device, and it was claimed by the Yiga clan. Now, Link, I was informed that you were not at Zelda's side like instructed. That is very foolish of you.
No, Father, it was my fault. I am to blame. I ordered Link to leave my side, and I take full responsibility for the consequences of my actions. Link even disobeyed my orders and was still close by when we were ambushed. The Yiga clan would have taken my life if it weren't for Link's heroic actions, so blame me, not him.
That is very noble of you, Zelda, but there will be no consequences for you, for I fear that Hyrule may be doomed. And the only hope Hyrule has now is you and your sacred powers. You must make your way to the Spring of Wisdom and pray. The whole of Hyrule will be praying for you. It will be a dangerous task. Even if it does work, I fear we may be out of time.
Thank you for accompanying me, Link. I know the way I've been treating you lately is not fair, and I want to apologize to you. I was frustrated at myself and how my powers will not spark, and I took it out on you. I'm sorry. I hope you can forgive me. And you saved me without a moment's hesitation when I was being attacked, despite how I've been treating you. You have my deepest thanks, and again, you were accompanying me to Mount Lanayru when you didn't have to. Thank you. You are a bigger person than me, and I have learned a lot from you. Thank you, Link.
So the reason I decided to add the ball thing is, so the downfall of Hyrule is partially Zelda's fault. Since she seems determined to blame herself for everything that went wrong, I decided, fine, let's make it so it is her fault. And I think that might be an interesting direction to take the story, with Link and Zelda having to come to terms with the fact that Hyrule is the way it is because of them. But another problem is Link. His lack of emotion makes him a really tricky son of a gun to pin down, and one way of fixing this is to give Link a voice. Now, I'm in the camp that I don't want Link to have a voice unless it's something like this.
I just wonder what Ganon's up to.
I don't know what's wrong with me, but I unironically love these voices because they're so bad you don't want him to speak. But even in this cutscene, Link barely seems to care, and if Link doesn't care, then why should I? Also, just a small thing I want to add is Zelda goes to seal Ganon away herself and gets eaten, but her sacred powers keep her safe and she's able to hold Ganon at bay. She does this for 100 years. When you save her, she's still the same age, when she should be an old lady. And again, this could work for the story as well. Zelda was stuck in there for 100 years. 100 years of doing absolutely nothing other than holding back a pig, so she would have plenty of time to spend regretting the things she's done to Link. Now, I understand this doesn't lend itself very well to Breath of the Wild 2. Having an old lady with you might not be so engaging to save, and if Zelda in Breath of the Wild 2 doesn't bring up at least once that she was trapped in a pig for 100 years, I'm gonna be mad. The theme for Breath of the Wild is kind of an odd one. It has a technology theme, but at the same time it's about the wilds and surviving nature. I mean, it even says on the back of the disc case, survive in the wilderness, but did you ever really feel like you were doing that? I mean, it even has Link lining up a shot on a boar. Now, unless this is supposed to be symbolism for Ganon, this isn't something that you ever need to do because food items are in such abundance, and that's the thing I find really weird. You have both nature and technology themes in this game. Both are opposing themes, but it's not like they have them playing off of each other in some kind of interesting way. They just kind of both exist, and neither feels all that fleshed out. If they pushed further in one direction instead of a little in both, I feel it could have felt a lot better.
I mean, Breath of the Wild has light survival game elements like being able to cook food, almost being able to craft things like the campfire, temperature differences in the weather, but it never goes any further than that. It's not like they had a hunger and thirst bar that would make you focus on collecting certain resources, an actual crafting system as well as being able to build things. But I'll be honest, a nature survival setting for a Zelda game could work if they put a lot of effort into it, but it's not one I'm super interested in, plus survival games kinda suck. They're grounded in being realistic, which doesn't work too well for video games because video games are supposed to allow us to escape the mundaneness of the real world. I understand when Breath of the Wild was being made, survival games were everywhere, so it makes sense that Breath of the Wild would jump on this trend. But the technology theme, on the other hand, has a ton of interesting and creative things you could do with this one. Now, Zelda games are known for being in a medieval fantasy setting, but there's one thing that's always interested me, and it was things like this, and this. They've always felt out of place and unexpected, and rather jarring. And you don't expect to see technology like this in a medieval game, but it was always really cool to see, and it gets you by surprise. So imagine my excitement when I saw this. I thought, yes, we are finally going to get a Zelda game with a technology theme, and I do understand this is an unfair expectation on my part. But a while ago there was a video made where it showed off some old concepts of Breath of the Wild, and one of them was where aliens came down and presumably mechanized Hyrule. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, that's right, Kirby Planet Robobot did the exact same thing, and like in The Legend of Zelda, Kirby has sort of a medieval theme with a technology theme teased every now and then, even though Kirby does tend to dip its toe into space more often than Zelda does. But with Kirby Planet Robobot, it has a technology theme and it commits to it. Everything in this game is consistent with the theme, the enemies, the areas, the new mechanics, and I have to say Kirby's better off because of it. This is my favourite Kirby game because of things like Waddle Dee's driving cars in a city area. I love this, and it wouldn't have existed without a technology theme, and the same applies for the Zelda franchise. If they went all out with a technology theme, they could have done some really cool things like reimagining all the enemies we know and love, dungeons and items, changing them up with a technology theme, and the Master Sword could be used in a really interesting way, like being able to hack things, and the Master Sword could get a cool technological redesign, and the story could go like this. You do 3 dungeons to get the Master Sword and go confront Ganon, and just as Link is about to deliver the final blow, Aliens come down and take Link, Zelda and Ganon up to their ship, imprisoning them in separate wings of the ship, and the aliens abduct them to try and get the Triforce pieces so they can make a wish, because a planet with an artifact that can grant any wish to somebody is probably going to get some attention. But Link is able to escape thanks to his Master Sword's new hacking ability, and Zelda's wing of the ship is inaccessible, so you have to go free Ganon, which could set up for some really interesting interactions between these two characters as they team up against the aliens. And you could have a playable Ganon, but obviously at the end of the game he betrays you and takes the alien technology for himself, setting up for the final battle. Obviously there would be more to it than that, having to return to Hyrule to do dungeons to unlock Zelda's wing of the ship, and one of those dungeons could be handled by Ganon himself, where we get to see how he solves puzzles, or rather how he does not. I'd like to imagine it would be something like this, where he would just break the puzzle instead of solving it. So I really wish they would do something like this, because I feel like there's far more they could have done with it than what Breath of the Wild did, which was more like, oh, here's some guardians, divine beasts, and some shrines, and the Shiga Slate. Enjoy your technology theme. And that's such a waste of both Breath of the Wild's nature and technology themes, because Nintendo doesn't tend to double dip into quirks like this. This may be the one and only time we get to see either of these themes again, and Breath of the Wild 2 supports this because we don't see much of either of these themes being pushed here. And that is a good thing. I hope Breath of the Wild 2 does its own thing, and I know we've seen so little, so it's hard to say, but I do hope one day that we get to see a fully realized technology theme in a Zelda game. Now, I don't want this video to be super negative, especially when people work their asses off to make this game, and it would be unfair if I was to only talk about the bad bits and gloss over the good part. Now, I have played through this game 3 times, one for my first playthrough, one for my second where I rushed the DLCs and got the massive advantages they bring, the most fun one, and this one for the review purposes. In all, beating all 120 shrines and divine beasts during these playthroughs, my opinions have not changed all that much. I still hate the bits I hate, and I still like the bits that I like. And one of the bits I've always loved is the Yiga clan. Not only is sneaking into the Yiga clan one of the highlights of the entire game, you get a not too difficult but very fun and funny fight against Master Koga. His dialogue is really good and never fails to get a couple of chuckles out of me. This also extends to the rest of the clan. I don't know if it was intentional that the world was made to be so large and devoid of anything interesting, so it would make the Yiga clan stand out even more, and like their master, the rest of the clan are easily the most consistently funny parts of this game. I love their obsession with bananas. It's so ridiculous but hilarious at the same time. There's truly nothing like seeing a trained assassin completely drop his guard for a bunch of bananas. And there's also the Yiga clan members found on the side of the road in certain locations around the world. These guys are a riot. Their dialogue is some of the funniest in the whole franchise. Never failed to get a laugh out of me, to the point where I would intentionally seek them out just to see what ridiculous thing they were going to say to me. I also love how they're like the villain that knows they're completely outmatched by the hero, but they give it their darndest anyway. Another thing I have to commend the game devs on is, of course, the world. It's massive and everybody knows that, but it's also really well crafted. For example, Breath of the Wild has many different regions, but each of these regions has a completely different look and feel to them. Sora's domain has coral plants everywhere, with this blue stone that can't be mistaken for any other. Akala has maple trees everywhere, but the stone color is red. Even the snow areas have very distinct looks. Mount Lanayru has large ice pillars. The Gerudo Highlands have the steepest cliffs in the entire game that just go straight up. And with the Hebra Highlands, there's not anything that makes this area super distinctive, but it can't be easily mistaken for any of the other snow areas either. It also has a massive snow tundra as well. Personally, I think you could plonk me anywhere randomly on the map, and just by looking at the trees and the color of the rocks, I would be able to triangulate a rough idea of where I would be on the map. And that's super cool, but there's just one teeny tiny problem. What's the point of all this unique looking stuff if there's nothing special? For example, this area has a unique looking skull than the rest found in Hyrule. This whole area is surrounded by a bog that you have to cross in order to infiltrate the monster camp. But once you beat all the monsters, you find a chest with a silver rupee in it. And that's it. This whole cool looking area, and it amounts to nothing. An area like this you'd expect to have some kind of item or something, but no. And then there's the bears. There's a den in the game which is an easy way to find bears to ride, and yes, you can ride bears in this game. What other game can you ride bears? None as far as I know, but the problem is this. What's the point? The answer is none. There is no special quest that you can do while riding a bear. It doesn't even have a unique attack while riding it. It does nothing. And that's a pretty common trend with Breath of the Wild. There's a lot of cool looking things and areas, but if it's not tied to a shrine, it means nothing. Another example of this is this mountain. It has the same problem as the bear, with a thing that you can ride but it serves no purpose. And I mean, just have something like this in Wind Waker or Twilight Princess where you can dig up things. It doesn't have to be much, just something. And you could have something special for this guy as well. There could be a special barrier at a cave entrance near to the mountain where you find him that you can only cross while riding him. And in that cave you find a treasure chest with Wolflink in it. Yes, I did just want to take a second to complain about the fact that Wolflink is locked behind an amiibo, but I think it's fair for me to complain about this because unlike costumes being inaccessible without the right amiibo or Epona, the Wolflink amiibo does something super special and puts Wolflink into the game as a companion. But the Wolflink amiibo is extremely hard to come by, meaning only a handful of people got to experience this, and that's a damn shame because a lot of time and effort went into putting him into the game with sound effects and animations and all that good stuff, just to be wasted because nobody owned the amiibo. So having a proper way of unlocking him in game would be great. I just so happen to be one of the people that does own this amiibo. The problem is I'm just too stubborn to take him out of the box, so you are staying in there, my friend. Now back to what I was saying before about each purveyance and how they look different, but gameplay wise function the exact same as every other area. Now the weather may be different or there may be a temperature difference, but all the monsters and interactables can be found in other locations with a few exceptions like the cannons on Death Mountain or the Moldugas in the Gerudo Desert being a completely unique fight. Now some monsters do have elemental variants depending on what area you're in, but that barely matters. If you're still fighting these enemies the exact same way as before, it doesn't count. The only one you could count as making an actual gameplay difference is the Ice and Fire Stone Talus, because they add an extra step by making you hit them with the opposite element in order to be able to climb them, but that's bare minimum. What would all these areas be if the exploration was not up to scratch. And as I mentioned before, this game's sheer utility when it comes to exploration puts it above the rest, but like I said, a massive missed opportunity, the hookshot. Now, it would not be a Sheikah Slate ability, but an item more in the vein of the bow and Korok leaf, where it has durability and different tiers of strength, starting with the Traveler's hookshot, where it appears similar to the hookshot in Wind Waker because of the Traveler's bow. It has a very similar design to the bow in Wind Waker. Then there's the Knight's hookshot and the Royal Claw shot, each improving with durability, damage and range for each tier. Now, what does the hookshot do and where do I get it, do I hear you say? The hookshot's function is to pull you to any grabbable surface, and which ones are they? Every surface you can climb on in Breath of the Wild. So no, it does not work on shrines or divine beasts or towers. I know you can climb on towers, but that would help skip some of the tower puzzles, so no. Every other surface is fair game. Now you might be thinking that's busted, but they don't have to be super long range. About this long for the Travelers, and for the Royal Claw shot it would be about double that, and for the Knights somewhere in the middle. Now that's not super long range, it's just a bit to take off some of the climbs, and something to keep in your back pocket in case of that cursed rain, which might make some of the smallest cliffs into a challenge. Being able to hookshot partway up the cliff could save some headache and time when it rains. The durability on the other hand could be quite low, only getting a few shots, so for the Travelers you get 4, Knights 8, and Royal 12, something like that. And where you find them, like most weapons in the game, can be found from monster camps and chests, and like most weapons have some preset locations that will always respawn every blood moon, but they could still be quite rare, making it something that you only want to use if you have to. Also, it would share inventory space with the bows, and for damage, it does do damage, but it's not for that, so it will only do about 6 at most, but it does stun enemies for about 4 seconds, so if a monster is armed with one, it can do the same to you, allowing its friends to get a free whack on you if you do get hit by one. Now I do understand I'm asking for a lot here, but I'd be curious to know if I were to commission someone that knows how to mod something like this into Breath of the Wild, I'd like to know how long it would take to complete adding the hookshot to the game, because I've seen some pretty incredible feats achieved by modders, so I know it would be possible, and if Nintendo can add something like Wolf Link to Breath of the Wild, then they can add the hookshot, even if it meant delaying the game for a few months when it came out in 2017. I would have been more than happy to wait, even though back in 2017 I wanted nothing more than Breath of the Wild in my little hands. But personally, I think it would have been worth the wait for such an important and iconic item. The fact that it's not in the game still blows my mind to this day. This is the game where I think the hookshot could have really shined. It would have been so much fun to use, and Breath of the Wild was the one game that could have made the best use of it, because every surface is climbable. Now, as I said earlier in the video, Breath of the Wild gives the player so many different ways of moving around the world, but what's the point of all these different ways you can explore this world if there's nothing to drive the player to explore it? Now, the game does have points of interest and things to do, those things being shrines, divine beasts, towns and Koroks, but there's a lot of empty space in between. Now, most players will probably do all the shrines because they're the biggest piece of content that feels rewarding at the same time, but they're the most time consuming thing, not including the Koroks, and not because of the puzzles they contain, but because the time spent travelling between them. In that sense, it's similar to Wind Waker's Great Sea, where it's mostly just empty space with points of interest, but instead of points of interest being islands, they're shrines, and instead of crossing vast oceans, it's mountains and hills. But in Wind Waker, it's all automatic. You just pick a direction and press sail, and off you go. You get to sit back and relax, but in Breath of the Wild you can just spend quite a while running from shrine to shrine. It doesn't actually take that long to go from one to another because they're everywhere, but when you times it by 120 it adds up quickly. The amount of time you'll spend just running, climbing and gliding is quite decent. Not to say that's bad because they're satisfying actions to perform, but when you do it over and over again just for a shrine, it gets a little stale. But if all those actions were for something like a dungeon, it would be much more satisfying. Seeing that structure on the horizon slowly get closer and closer would feel great. The only time I ever felt this was with the Forgotten Temple. It looked like something different, a little hidden but big enough that it was still easy to spot. But when my Sheikah sensor went off halfway through, my heart sank. All of this just for a shrine. This area looks so promising. The only thing that I ever got this excited for,
other than that was the Sheikah Tower, since there's a reward for getting to the top, it reveals the map for you, and usually at their base there's a puzzle, and I love these because they're environmental and a breath of fresh air unlike the shrines. I didn't even know that you could knock over these pillars on my first playthrough because they're unlike anything else in Breath of the Wild. They can't be stasis or anything in order to tell that they're interactable, and I love that. It lets you figure it out for yourself. I want to address the shrines directly. For the shrines, all of them look exactly identical to one another on the outside, and all share the same visuals for the inside as well. There's also a problem with a lot of the shrines being blessings, 29 of them to be exact, which is almost a quarter of all shrines, which have absolutely no content in them at all. Blessings usually appear after doing something like Eventide Island, but not all the time. Sometimes it's as much as blowing up a wall, and not only that, a lot of them are also tests of strength. 3 difficulty levels, minor, modest and major. The fight is exactly the same for all 3, except for more health and damage for the respective difficulties. 20 of them are tests of strength, 21 if you count the teaching as well. Then there's the puzzle shrines. Most puzzles can be beat in about 2 minutes. Now they're not all bad when it comes to puzzle shrines. There are some pretty good ones like the Blue Flame, which is very involved and fun. If all shrines were like this, and on this level, that would be great. But I would be happy if they removed 75% of all shrines, meaning only 30, but merge some of the ones with similar puzzles together, like the electricity ones, for example, into one big shrine. All the same puzzles, but all in one now. Then have greater emphasis on entering these shrines, requiring some sort of environmental puzzle or challenge, like traversing any of the mazes, the dark area, or Eventide Island, or a mini dungeon. For an example, in Faron, where you visit the Spring of Courage, instead of throwing in a lame dragon scale, it could be the entrance to a mini dungeon similar to that of Indiana Jones, with boulder traps, hidden pits, and arrow traps everywhere, and maybe at the end of it you have to carry one of these glowing orbs out of the dungeon's while it collapses. Fun things, creative things, different things. Imagine if all shrines were on that level. That would be fantastic. No more waiting for a certain time of day for a snowball, or a blood moon, or an arrow in the right direction. Less is more, and it would save time travelling between the shrines since there's only 30 of them instead of 120, and it would mean you wouldn't have to go to goddess statues anymore either, because you're doing the equivalent of 4 shrines at once, meaning you could just make the decision for what vessel you want right then and there. Oh, the green tunic. It's a staple of the series. While not every Zelda game is about the Triforce, Ganon, Zelda, the Master Sword, 100% of Zelda games do feature the green tunic. Some even have a pretty big importance placed on the green tunic. For example, in Skyward Sword, the headmaster says it looks as if you were born to wear that tunic. And in Twilight Princess, the light spirits refer to him wearing the green tunic as his awakened form. The Master Sword is held in slightly lower regard than the green tunic, and rightfully so. The green tunic has been around since the very start and is always there no matter what, and it's likely the most recognizable part of the whole franchise. If you've never heard of Zelda before, you've probably heard of that guy in tights and the goofy green hat. Even Breath of the Wild has the green tunic, but it's quite extremely late into the game, like 120 shrines late. Once you beat all 120 shrines, you head off to the Forgotten Temple to claim your prize, and the green tunic, I'm not gonna lie, looks really good on him. But as you'll quickly notice, it's incredibly weak in terms of armor strength, and you'll most likely already have a fully upgraded set of armor at this point in the game, but it's a late game set, so it must be good, and you do what any logical person would do and take it to the Great Fairy for an upgrade, but you'll quickly find out it needs some pretty rare materials, mainly dragon materials. Now there are multiple things wrong with this. For starters, there are 3 different pieces of armor, each requiring 2 specific dragon materials per upgrade level. First requiring 2 dragon scales, then 2 dragon claws, then 2 dragon teeth, and finally 2 dragon horns, and for each armor piece requiring parts from different dragons. For the cap you need parts from Faron, and for the shirt, Nadra parts, and for the trousers, Dinraal parts, meaning to fully upgrade all this gear you need to shoot these dragons 24 times total. Now that doesn't sound too bad, but when you consider they take 15 minutes for them to show up when they're being good, mind you, means you're spending 6 hours just standing there waiting for dragons to show. So I'm going to put a little link in the top left hand corner of the screen for the rest of the video so you can see just a bit of the pain that is waiting for these dragons. Now there are some advantages to help you skip parts of this process, like by the time you get the green tunic, you've most likely encountered some of these dragons at some point and got some of their parts before you need them, especially with Faron, which appears in 3 different locations, giving you quite the head start. But the other 2, not so much. I don't know why, but Dinraal always seemed to be a lot more stubborn than the other 2 and would take closer to 30 minutes to show. But it didn't need to be like this. There's 2 ways you could fix this. First, if you have a Savage Lionel bow or any bow that shoots multiple times, you can get as many pieces as you can shoot them. And just like that, now you can get all the pieces in one go if you're skilled enough, which is a good thing. Rewarding players for skilled gameplay or being well enough equipped for a challenge is a very good thing. That means if you're good enough, you can one cycle all the dragons, turning that 6 hours closer to 45 minutes. Now, if that's too easy for you, you could just halve the material requirement. Simple as that. Even that would have been greatly appreciated. But all this waiting must be worth it, right? It is the green tunic after all, and you've beaten all 120 shrines, meaning you've pretty much been everywhere on the map. But what does this upgrade perk do I hear you ask? I'm honestly at a bit of a loss for words for what it does. I shit you not, it makes your Master Sword's full health beam do 5 extra damage. That's it. Thank you for playing our game. Thank you for beating all of our shrines. Thank you for waiting for hours for dragons to show up. That's the reward you get for doing all this work. A big middle finger to the player. Why? I just don't get why. What was the problem with rewarding the player with something useful? I can think of so many things more useful than a tiny damage bonus on a beam that you only have when your health is tippity top full on a weapon that has a 10-minute cooldown when it breaks. They could have easily made it so the Master Sword has unlimited durability, the beam does more damage but doesn't require you to be at full health either. The tunic is a late game item after all, and the Master Sword's damage is good, but it's by no means the best, so it doesn't even break the game. But I think it needed to go further. Forget what I just said, this is actually what it should have done. Almost every status effect in the game should be applied, so yes, cold, heat, fire resistance, extra run speed, extra damage, swim speed, climb speed, better stealth, sand and snow walking. Now, I don't think all these stats should be maxed out, but the temperature resistances should be. This is even consistent with other Zelda games for the most part. Link can usually stand next to lava and be fine, same with cold, snowy areas. Why? The green tunic. And it's a late game item, so make it feel like one. And these changes don't even break the game in any major way. Oh wow, I can get around a bit quicker now, and I don't have to pause the game to change costume every time you enter an extreme temperature area. So what? But at least it feels like a major enough reward for beating the game's main content. Now, I'm not going to go into any major details since it's all pretty self-explanatory. There is none. Now, that's a bit of an exaggeration, and most of what actual music is in this game is good. Like this one, the problem is the rest. The rest of it is very minimalist and melancholy, even though the game is set in an apocalypse, so it should be more sinister and foreboding. A great example of this in-game is Castle Town. The music here is perfect compared to the music in the rest of the game. When just running around, the music sounds like this, which sounds more like the sun is out and everything's happy, and for a world riddled with monsters, it leaves a little something to be desired. But there was a really easy way to please fans of the series that have come to love the music in these games, and people that like adventure games with a little more kick than what Breath of the Wild offers, and that's with a music player. It pulls music from across the franchise and bam, done. Now players have a choice if they want to listen to this kind of music, and obviously you'd have a favourites album that you could customize. Anything would have been better than having to listen to this awful freezing soundtrack that drives me mad. It loops every 80 seconds, but it might as well be every 20 seconds because it repeats the same 2 sounds again and again. Also, I really don't think it suits the cold area at all. Personally, I think of caves or a big cavern with all the echoing and clacking going on. What happened to the vocals and the chimes? They go one and the same with cold areas, and I even asked 3 people that have never played Breath of the Wild what sort of area you'd imagine this music would be played in, and they all said caves.
I kid you not, I didn't influence their decision, I just played the music and said, what area would this fit into, or where do you think of when you hear this? Caves was the answer. Now you're just gonna have to take my word for it, but I did not expect all 3 people to give the same answer, and they were all asked individually, so yeah, this music suits caves better than snow, proved by 3 different people.
Now I understand this point may seem a bit odd, but I still think it's something worth talking about since Zelda games are known for being fantasy games, but Breath of the Wild leans heavily towards being realistic, and I do love the attention to detail in this game with the temperatures. For example, at high altitudes it's always cold, which you can see by ballooning up into the sky, and how in the desert it's hot during the day and freezing during the night. Also, you can stand in the shade to lower your temperature, as well as being able to hold elemental weapons that raise and lower your temperature respectively. This level of detail is really great, and it doesn't end there. I love how the Sheikah Slate's weather forecast can be wrong. You usually only notice this when it rains, since that's the only one that impacts gameplay, but I really like this detail because weather is known for being unpredictable. Another detail I'm not so fond of is the sand and snow. I know it's realistic that they slow you down and it's hard to run on both these surfaces, but I have to ask, is it more fun because of this? Is it more fun that I have to change to a certain kind of shoe or suit? Because personally, I think no. Look at Twilight Princess as a really good example of this and how to handle this. In the desert, there is no movement penalty, and rightfully so. When playing through Twilight Princess, I was never like, gee, I want a realistic movement penalty, or Link to be hot in this area because it's a desert. Link acknowledging it's hot by his idle animation was enough. Even the snow area in this game works better. There is a movement penalty and it's way more extreme. There is, however, a way to completely counteract this by transforming into Wolf Link, a mechanic that, unlike Breath of the Wild, is always at your disposal when you enter that area. And this is where the magic side of it comes into. While it is great to make a realistic game with realistic details, a fantasy game? Not so much. Magic allows for a lot of creative liberties to be taken because you don't have to explain every single detail with an explanation. It's already done with, it's magic. A great way to visualize this is with these. For simplicity, I'm going to call them both tunics. Ocarina of Time and Breath of the Wild's fire tunics both do the exact same thing. Both look completely different. Ocarina of Time doesn't even protect his face, while Breath of the Wild on the other hand has a lot more detail and even goes as far to explain how it works, by saying Goron artisans use flame resistant rocks to craft these fireproof boots. Okay, that's all cool and all, but now let's see what happens when we take them off. Breath of the Wild Link almost immediately starts taking damage and will quickly die, while Ocarina of Time Link has a fancy timer which is based on how much health he has when entering high temperature areas. 2 seconds for each quarter of a heart, meaning the more health you have, the longer you can survive. How? Magic. And this is also more fun because it encourages you being fast and keeping Link at high health. You never have to pause the game and switch tunic, and at the same time you're making both fire and water temples more challenging, which is nice for repeat playthroughs. For Breath of the Wild's Death Mountain, this is something that you cannot do. As for my favourite game, which is Majora's Mask, this game is packed with magic throughout the whole game, and it's great. If Majora's Mask had to have an explanation for everything, it would be a lesser game, since a lot of creativity would be gone. For example, a moon with a giant face? Magic. Bunnies that make you run faster? Magic. Being able to transform into a giant? Magic. Flipping an entire dungeon upside down? Magic. Being able to shoot lasers out of your sword? Magic. Reversing time with a song? Magic. Slowing time with a song? Magic. Ladies talking to me in real life? Magic. Freezing water with an ice arrow? Magic. Do I need to continue? And Majora's Mask is the most creative Zelda game in the whole series because of its use of magic. And this creativity through magic is something that looks like it's going to be used quite a bit in Breath of the Wild 2. In Breath of the Wild 2's trailer only going for 1 minute and 40 seconds, we see a few things that are magic. One big thing is the floating islands, with which Link does not appear to be freezing, so that contradicts Breath of the Wild 1's logic with the high altitude low temperature thing, which is a good thing because so far Breath of the Wild 2 is dipping back into the fantasy setting, which I'm much more excited about, and hopefully a lot of creative things come from this game. So that's it for this video. Thanks for making it to the end of this video. Now I don't want to waste your time, so I've got the other 2 videos waiting for you right there. And don't worry, they're not as long as this one. So thanks again, thanks for watching.